In this video, I'm going over all of the memory recall presets that I use with my Sony FX3 and Sony FX30 cameras to make sure that I can have the right settings to film cinematic videos quickly in any situation. Hey, what's going on? My name is Sarellas and I'm a videographer and editor from Ottawa and Toronto. And in this video, I'm going over all of my memory recall presets to show you exactly how I dial in my camera so that I can get between 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second with all of my settings locked in an instant. So first thing you want to do when you're dialing in your memory recall presets is put on a fast lens. This means a lens with a low f-stop. So I have this camera on 35 to 150 f2 to 2.8 on my camera right now, and I've got it set all the way down to f2. And the reason you want to do this is because when you're dialing in these presets, if you set your aperture at like f4 because you have an f4 lens on, but then later you put on an f2.8 lens on your camera, then all these presets are going to be like locked in at f4 and you're going to have to bring your f-stop down. But if you dial in these presets with an f2 aperture, for example, and you put an f4 lens on, then your presets are automatically going to go to the lowest possible aperture of the lens that you're using. I hope that makes sense. But anyways, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's get into this first bit here. So if we come to our menu here, and sorry, I'm not going to be looking at the camera that much. I might be looking at my menu a lot. So we want to come into our menu here and we'll go to dial, customize. And the first thing we're going to do is set up a custom key so that we can actually change our memory recall presets quickly. So go to dial, customize, and then custom key / dial set for video specifically. We're going to go to these top function buttons here. Here they are. And number one, that's this button right here, if you can see it on camera, is going to be MR camera set memory. So if I click in, you can see where in the menu this is. If you go to shooting mode, you can choose that as one of your presets. And what this does is if I come back out here and I'm just looking at whatever image I'm filming right now, I can click that. And now whether I select 1, 2, or 3, whatever settings I have applied across the board right now on my camera are going to fill either the memory 1, the memory 2, or the memory 3 slot. And then I can quickly go to these exact settings from the menu here by clicking the mode button and just picking 1, 2, or 3. So that's where we're going to start with. Let's go to number 1. And I was just on a job, so these settings might be a little bit messed up and not exactly what we want right now, but that's kind of good because I can show you exactly how I'm going to dial everything in. Let me turn off this histogram here so you have to see everything properly. There we go. So we're going to start by dialing in our shutter, our iris, and our ISO values. And I usually like memory recall preset number 1, which is right here. This is what we're going to set right now to be my 24 frames per second preset. Now, if you've updated to the latest firmware on the FX3 or the FX30 and you don't have shutter angle available on your cameras, I recommend you use that to dial in your shutter. I haven't updated my firmware yet because I've just been way too busy. Like, I'm moving and there's a lot of stuff happening right now. So I'm just going to set my shutter, as you can see here, to 1/48. I usually leave this at f2.8 because I like using this lens as a constant f2.8 zoom. So I'm going to leave that at f2.8. And then my ISO, I'm going to leave at the lower of my two base ISOs, which is ISO 800 on the FX3 and the FX30. If you're using the A7S III, I'm pretty sure your lower base ISO is ISO 640. So set that accordingly. And then I'm going to dial in my white balance. So I like keeping my white balance at daylight. You can see I've already got these presets set up, but you can adjust this to whatever you need it to be. Sometimes if I'm going to be filming in a stadium and it's got like those floodlight LEDs up top, I might set my white balance to 4500 and then dial that in as my preset. But we're just going to keep this on 5600, which is where I keep it as a default if I don't know where I'm filming or I'm just setting everything up as per usual. And then we'll go into the menu and we're going to go through all of our settings, just make sure everything's dialed in the way we like. So I like having proxies on. So I'm recording proxies in camera, which is like a lower resolution file that is easier to edit off of, that I can link to my higher resolution 4K file that I'm filming here. You can see I'm filming an XAVCS 4K, 23.98 frames per second, 100 megabits, 422 10-bit. S&Q doesn't really matter. We're not shooting that right now. Log shooting settings. I like using flexible ISO just because it's easier, but if you want, you can use Cine EI or Cine EI Quick if you're filming in a setting with more controlled lights. But like I'm filming in like sports arenas a lot of the time and I have no control over the lighting, so sometimes I need that flexible ISO. Filming sgamut 3.cine, slog3. As you can see, we're not embedding the LUT file. Lens compensation. I can't turn breathing compensation on with this lens because it's a third-party lens from Tamron, but if you have a Sony lens, turn breathing compensation on here. This is a very useful tool for any Sony lenses, and you want to make sure you're using it if you have a Sony lens that's compatible, because then you won't have that focus breathing when your focus point shifts from something in the foreground to something further in the background or vice versa. We're going to keep going down all these different settings here. Audio recording level. I like to keep my audio recording level really low in the camera and then adjust my gain on the external microphone that I'm using with the camera. That way I get a cleaner audio signal. So if your audio recording level is high, I would bring that down to like 1 or 2, because this is also a setting that's going to carry over with your memory recall presets. Anything else here that I find important? Let's see. We've already set our white balance. We've already got ourselves an S-Log3, log shooting mode. Let's do autofocus. So I use continuous autofocus. We're going to use a fast transition speed. I usually like shooting in the wide focus area, and then I'll use the touchscreen on the back of my camera to do like that touch tracking thing that Sony does so well. So I like leaving it as wide, but if you want to change your focus area, like this is the place that you want to do it. Maybe you want to do like a spot focus mode or something like that, or maybe you want to do center fix if you're filming for social. Face priority, I usually leave this on. If I'm filming like football or something and guys have like face covers over their eyes and like you can't really see their eye through the visor, I might turn eye priority off, but in general, this is something that I'm leaving on. Peaking assist, it's on, but like I usually just use the peaking assist on my external monitor, so this isn't that big of a deal for me. And I don't think there's anything else that I really need to be concerned about here for my custom function buttons here. So now that we've got all of our settings set up on this memory recall preset, we're going to click that camera set memory shortcut that we set up before, and we're going to click on 1, and that is registered. So now if I come over to like memory recall preset 3 and everything changes, you can see my ISO is all crazy now, my shutter's way up, my white balance is different. If I come back to memory recall preset 1, then we've got that 24 frames per second locked in, all the same settings. Everything is good to go. You can see that like my standard steady shot, which I should have talked about, is on. My audio recording level is back to 2 where we set it. My autofocus is on, like face and eye priority. Our focus mode is still wide, and everything is how we had it. So now let's move on to our second memory recall preset. We're going to go to MR2 here, and I like to use memory recall preset number 2 as my 60 frames per second. So we're going to set this to be, well, 60 frames per second. So let's start by doing that. We're going to go XAVCS 4K again, and we're going to go 59.94p and 200 megabits 422 10-bit. S&Q settings don't matter right now. We're not filming in S&Q mode. Log settings are the same as previously. Proxies, again, you want to have these on. I like filming with proxies even though it takes up more space, because that small file really helps me. Again, turn breathing compensation on. I won't go over all of this again. All of this should pretty much be the same. Just make sure your audio recording level is where it was. So this was a 5. My audio recording level when I set that 24 frames per second preset was at 2. So we're going to bring that down to 2 so that our audio is consistent and we don't need to adjust our gain as we switch between frame rates. I don't think there's anything else here. Let's check our steady shot. So if you want, you can set this to active if you prefer to have like more stabilization done with the camera. This does provide a bit of a crop, and I'll show you that right now. So this is what steady shot looks like set in standard. And if I set it to active, you can see we get a bit of a crop. So like there's less shake right now. Like this basically looks like I'm holding it on a tripod, and like this, you can see some level of wobble while I hold the camera. And if you turn it off, you can see like even more wobbles. But if you want the extra reach, you can set this to active. I'm going to set it to standard. Just know that you can swap that to your liking. So we'll make sure our white balance is set to 5600, and it is, so that's perfect. I really wouldn't recommend using auto white balance, because I think that you just want your white balance to be consistent, and then if there's any mistakes, like the white balance is wrong in one part, at least the mistake is consistent. You can easily correct it. If you let the camera make that white balance decision for you, it can be really hard to correct it because you never know what the camera's doing. Making sure your peaking settings are all where you want them to be, but all my settings are pretty dialed in here. Now, I usually like keeping my ISO when I'm filming 60 frames per second around like 2000, 2500. I feel like that's generally the sweet spot for me when I'm filming in the arenas that I'm usually in. And I also like cranking my shutter a little bit faster, because for sports, I like having less motion blur. I think it creates a faster, more intense look that's cool for like fast action sports, like what I film. So I'm going to crank my shutter to 1/250. If you're using shutter angle with the new update, then you're going to want to bring your shutter angle below 180 degrees. So something like a 90-degree shutter angle would be good for you in this scenario. This all looks good. So let's click that camera set memory shortcut we set up, select 2, and click OK if everything here looks good. And actually, now I'm looking at it, everything here does not look good. I have face priority detection off, you can see it says AF off with the little person next to it. So let's go back out here and let's turn on eye priority like that. And now we're going to come to 2 and register. Now all we have left to do is set our memory recall 3 preset, and I like to make this my 120 frame per second preset. So let's come into image quality, file format is XAVC S4K as we have done. Movie settings 119.88p, and we're gonna record 280 megabits 422 10-bit. This is going to give you a crop on your camera. Proxies, you see we can't turn these on here, so this is going to be off by default. Again, set your lens compensation, turn on that breathing comp if you can, depending on the lens that you're using. We're just going to come back out here. I'll click the function button on the back of my camera to pull all this up, set that to 2. You can't use active stabilization in 120 frames per second on the FX3 because the crop that you get with active stabilization that I showed you for 60 frames per second is already applied by default when you're filming in 120 frames per second. So your camera can crop in more, but you still get that standard stabilization, which is pretty good. I don't need peaking display because I'm going to use that on my monitor. I don't need grid lines because I'm going to, again, do that on my external monitor. But if you want any of this stuff and you're not using external monitor, again, face and eye priority is on. Our focus area is still set to wide. And I want to change my white balance. You can see my white balance is set to 5,000 with a bit of a shift here. So let's just dial this back in to 5600. And again, I'm going to overcrank my shutter. So let's go something like 1/400. And you can see that I've got my ISO set to 12,800. And that's because ISO 12,800 is the higher of the 2 dual base ISOs on the Sony FX3. If I'm doing this on the FX30, I'm probably going to bring my shutter down to 1/250 because I need that lower shutter to compensate for the light. And then I'm gonna bring my ISO to like 3,200 or 4,000 because this is kind of the max ISO that I'm comfortable using on the FX30 before there's like too much noise. But this is the FX3, so we're gonna bring that up to 12,800 because at ISO 12,800, this camera performs really clean. And we'll crank our shutter and we'll set our iris to f2.8. And this should be good. So again, we're going to click our memory recall setting, select 3 and register. Now when I click the mode button on the back of my camera, I can go to memory recall 1, and this is a true 24 frame per second preset. If I click mode again and go to 2, this is my 60 frame per second preset with an overcranked shutter. And if I go to memory recall preset 3, then this is my 120 frame per second preset. And if you want to make any changes to this, it's real easy. So let's say I'm filming a sports game outside and it's gone from daytime to nighttime, and I want to change my white balance from 5,600 to 4,000. Then I can just change my white balance down while I'm on memory recall preset 2 if I want to do this in 60 frames per second. And then you click the shortcut that we set up for camera set memory, go to 2, register it as we've done. And now if I swap off and then I swap back to my 60 frame per second preset, it's at 4,000. We're going to change this back so I don't like have to deal with that later. But that's it. And now doing this, you can really easily swap back and forth between different frame rates with all of your settings locked in. And you can even set up like different presets for daytime and nighttime and different filming environments, like whatever you want to do. But it's a super easy way to customize your camera to your liking and make filming a breeze so that you're thinking less about settings and can focus more on the composition of your shots and the story you're trying to tell when you're out in the field filming. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this on a regular basis. I'd love to have you around for that. If you got any questions or comments about anything I talked about here, maybe I didn't cover something that you wanted me to cover because it just slipped my mind, drop it in the comment section and I'll be pretty active down there getting back to you guys. But that's going to be all for this one. So until next time, peace.